The prophets would be calling towards beliefs, but they would also be calling towards actions. So if you go and you look, the job of the prophets was not only to go and teach people to worship Allah and to stop worshipping idols, but you find that the prophets actually addressed the societal ills in their community. So when they saw that the community was doing something wrong, they would speak out against it. Let's look at some of those prophets. Prophet Shaykh, for example, his people were cheating. They were stealing from caravans, they were robbing others, and what would happen is when they would weigh goods, they would have false weights on them. So you put like a kilogram of flour, they would have like a weight underneath, which would give you the wrong measurement, so you're paying extra money to them. So they would be ripping people off. Prophet Shaykh did not tell them, just focus on worshipping on Allah. No, he actually called out their practice and said, this is wrong, you need to stop. Prophet Musa, alayhi salam, he also called out the oppression. He not only called out Fir'aun, the Pharaoh, for saying that he's God, or for the sun worship that they were engaging in, the idolatry that they had in ancient Egypt, but he said that the oppression that you're doing of the Bani Israel, of the children of Israel, to build your pyramids and build your monuments and all of that, this is wrong, and it needs to stop. Prophet Isa did the same thing. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did the same thing. He not only told the people of Arabia to stop worshipping idols, he told them to stop gambling, to stop prostitution, to stop interest, to stop drinking alcohol. So the role of every prophet is to teach people what they're supposed to believe, and their job is also to teach people what they're doing wrong in their society and that they need to stop this because it's not good for the community. There's another prophet that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent for the guidance of people. And this was Prophet Lut, Prophet Lot. Now sometimes many people, they don't talk about Prophet Lut very much. They talk about Prophet Nuh, they talk about Prophet Musa, they talk about all these other prophets. Don't assume that it's because Prophet Lut is only mentioned a few times in the Quran. In fact, I did a Quranic search, and the verses in the Quran that talk about Prophet Lut are about 105. This was just according to my count. Maybe I missed a few. So Prophet Lut is a very significant prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned his story over 100 times, 100 verses in the Quran. And Prophet Lut was the nephew of Prophet Ibrahim. And he was sent to the people of Sodom, or the people of Sodom, which is near the Dead Sea. Now, what was the issue with the people of the Prophet Lut in particular? What was their specific? They had a unique issue. People of Prophet Shaykh were stealing. They were ripping people off. People of Prophet Musa, they were engaging in racism and oppression and all of these things, the people of Egypt at least. Prophet Lut's particular issue was that the people were engaging in a type of promiscuity and a type of intimate immorality that was happening, where men were having relationships with men, and perhaps women were having relationships with women. So there was a type of I know there's some kids here, so I'm going to try my best to make the language appropriate for everyone, but there were relations between, rather than just between men and women, rather than just men and women getting married, men would be marrying men. And perhaps it's not mentioned, but maybe women were doing the same thing with women. And they were having a relationship. They were like being dad and dad, and mom, rather than mom and dad, they were being dad and dad, or they were being mom and mom. And what happened is, Allah calls out this behavior. And He talks about how this is unhealthy, and how it's wrong, and how the people need to stop. So now it's really important to understand that if somebody has a relationship outside of marriage, it's called fornication. If they have a relationship with somebody else and they're cheating on their spouse, it's called adultery. And now both of these words, they almost sound archaic. They almost sound like they're outdated, like they're from some previous generation, because so much of this is going on. And despite the fact that it's wrong, there's a type of perversion when it comes to human relationships that's even worse than that. And that is exactly what his people were engaging in. What they call today is called homosexuality. So this was the problem that people faced in the time of Prophet Lut. Now it's very important to understand something here. When we say it's a perversion, it means that there's something abnormal about the type of behavior. Now what's happened today is that if you look at society today and you go throughout the history of the world, what you will find is that there are some things which are universally condemned in all societies throughout time, regardless of where you are and regardless of when you are. So let's give you some examples. If somebody is having a physical relationship with an animal, if somebody comes and says, I want to marry my dog. Somebody says, I want to marry this horse because I'm in love with it. There's actually a term for this, and the term is called zoophilia, or it's called bestiality. And this is actually listed in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, saying if somebody actually has this, they have what's called a paraphilia. It's been in the mental health manual since its origin. If somebody comes along and says, I would like to get married. If a guy comes along and says, I would like to get married to my mother. If a girl comes along and says, I would like to get married to my father. Throughout history, in most societies, people looked at that and said, that's gross. Something is wrong with that. That is not natural. That is not normal behavior. You're not supposed to be doing things like that. And what's interesting is that up until about 30 years ago or 40 years ago, in the DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, version 3, that all psychologists used to use, homosexuality was listed as a paraphilia. It was listed as a type of immoral behavior that people who are engaging in it, something's not right about them. And that's why throughout history you find that all the major world religions look down upon this practice. You find that all the major Jazakallahukhairan, you find that all the major societies and civilizations throughout the world, they had some type of laws restricting or forbidding this type of practice. But what's happened today in the last 30 years is that this type of behavior has become normalized. It's become something where not only is it viewed as something that's normal or something that's natural, but if you don't accept that it's normal and natural, you will be penalized. And that's why it becomes very challenging to talk about this issue and to talk about the story of Prophet Lut to a generation because anyone who is over the age of 40, they have a natural aversion and distaste. Just like Prophet Lut and just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in the Quran, they have a natural thing and they say, this is disgusting and it's gross. And you say, why do they think that way? They think that way because they grew up in a society where every single movie and every single book, if you ever find two men having a relationship, two women having a relationship, it was never viewed as something that was normal. It was always viewed as something that was abnormal. Every book, every movie, every song, everything that you can find in a culture, this was completely frowned down upon. And then when you go and you look at anyone who's under the age of 20, I'm excluding the 20 to 40 because this is like the middle confused generation. I'm not sure where they are exactly. Worse is under 20 actually. Anyone who's under the age of 20 has grown up in a culture where Disney movies portray figures where man and a man are having a relationship or they're kissing. Woman and a woman are having a relationship. Even Star Wars didn't get excluded from having a scene in there. You have cartoons having exactly characters like this. You have books inside of libraries at the age of kindergarten where they say that, you know what, there are two guys, raising a family or whatever it is. So what we find today is we find this gap. We find this generation gap on this issue in terms of what people naturally feel. There's on the one side, you have people over 40 who are like, this, I can't even believe that we're even talking about this. Why in the world do we even need a lecture about this? This is so naturally ingrained in people's, nature that this should be disgusting for anyone who has any common sense whatsoever. And then you have people who are under 20, and unless they have a strong religious Islamic background, they're looking at the people who are over 40 and they're saying, these backwards people, they don't understand, they're restrictive, they're mean, they're not tolerant, they're homophobic, they're transphobic, they're this, they're that, because that is the type of programming that most people are undergoing in society today. Now, hopefully the Muslims are the exception. But if there's somebody who's confused about this issue, what is a Muslim supposed to do when you're confused about something? You go back to the Quran and you see what is it that our Creator was trying to teach us about something where we cannot figure out what's going on, what is right and wrong, what's happening in society today, where are the lines, where are the limits, where do we draw all of these things? We need to go back and we need to look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. So let us go back to the story of Prophet Lut and look at it in more detail. In Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7, verse 80, it talks about the story of the people of Prophet Lut, and it says what he said to his people. The verse is, وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِّنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. It says, and remember when Lut, Prophet Lot, scolded the people, and he said, do you commit a shameful deed, the word is fahisha, that no one has ever done before? And when he says no one has ever done before, he meant as a community. In human civilization, you don't find an entire society actually normalizing this practice except one society in history. And that's the people of Prophet Lut in Sodom, in Sodom. Today, Western civilization has become the second. But you don't find this. You find pockets of some individuals doing something like this, but you don't find this being normalized anywhere else throughout the history of the world. Then the second thing, he says, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِّن دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. He says, you desire men instead of women. Normally, men will desire women, and women will desire men to have a physical relationship with them and to get married. So he's saying something's not right with you. You are desiring men instead of women. بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. You have gone too far. Meaning you've taken things too far in your immorality, and you're not understanding what is right and what is wrong. In the Quran, Allah does not only tell the story in one place. He tells, for example, the story of Prophet Adam in Surah Al-Baqarah. And then he tells the story of Prophet Adam again in Surah Al-A'raf, and he gives a different part of the story in different surahs of the Quran. Allah did the exact same thing with Prophet Lut. In one surah he gives a story and he tells us part of it, and then he tells us another part of the story giving us a different wording in a different part of the Quran. That's why there's over 105 verses about the Prophet Lut. In another chapter of the Quran, chapter 26, he mentions the same story with different wording. Prophet Lut says, أَتَأْتُونَ الذُّكْرَانَ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. Why do you desire men out of all people? Out of all the people you could choose, why would you choose men instead of women to have a physical relationship with? وَتَذَرُونَ مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ. And you leave the potential wives that Allah has created for you. There are women out there, you can get married, but you're not interested in that. You want to marry a man, or you want to have a relationship with a man. بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. You really are a wicked people. So Prophet Lut, and some of you probably heard of his story, but I'm going back to the verses. Prophet Lut, it's very clear what he's saying here. In the wording that he's using, it's very clear that he's basically saying three things about the practice of homosexuality. Which means a man having a relationship with a man physically, or a woman having a relationship with a woman. For the kids, basically men marrying men and women marrying women. What does Islam say? What is the Quran saying about it? Three things. Number one, that is prohibited in Islam, right? That is haram. But some Muslims, they stop there. And some parents, when they're teaching their kids, they simply stop there and they say, it's haram, period, no further explanation. And this is a mistake. There's two more things that we get from the story of Prophet Lut that's very important to understand. Number one, that it's prohibited. Number two, that it's fahisha, which means that it's shameful or shameless behavior. Meaning it's immoral behavior that anyone who has a natural tendency in their heart to understand what is right and wrong, they will realize that this is gross, immoral, indecent type of behavior. It's not different than a guy saying, I'm going to marry my mother, or a girl saying, I'm going to marry my father. If you're revolted at that, you say, that's gross. You should think it's gross. The same way that a guy having a guy physical relationship is considered to be gross. If you think that somebody is having a relationship with an animal and trying to marry their dog, which by the way, there are people who are doing this, having a relationship with an animal, then if you say there's something wrong with that, it's in the same category. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that in the Quran. He's saying it's shameful. And number three, He's saying it's unnatural. So you say, where does it say that it's unnatural? Prophet Lut said very clearly, and Allah said very clearly, مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. There has never been a people in the history of the world that has ever tried to normalize this behavior except you. What does that mean? If you're normalizing something that's not normal, that means that it's outside of being natural, outside of being normal. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. So this is the first topic we're going to be talking about, is homosexuality through the story of Prophet Lut. We're going to analyze this a little bit more. And number two is gender non-conformity. Okay, so the topic today was, what was the flyer? Like LGBTQ, right? Okay, many people have heard of these letters before. What does LGBT stand for? Right? How many of you know what LGBT stands for? Okay, what does the L stand for? Lesbian. So lesbian was basically when a girl has a relationship with a girl. What does the G stand for? Gay. Gay means a man has a relationship with a man. LGB, what does the B stand for? Bisexual, which basically means that someone is attracted to both genders and they say, I'm willing to have a relationship with a man and with a woman, which there's no problem if a man is having a relationship with a woman and vice versa. But this translates back to the same thing. They just wanted to add an extra letter and say, yeah, I'm attracted to both. So they got the B. So all of this has to do with having a physical relationship. Okay? What does the T stand for? Transgender. Okay? Now, this has absolutely no connection with the physical feelings that people have. This has to do with what you believe internally your gender is. Okay? Now the letters have expanded, so they added a Q, so it became LGBTQ. What does the Q stand for? I hear queer. What's another one? Queen? No, not queen. Questioning, thank you. There's two madhabs. Alright, people say there's madhabs in Islam. There's two madhabs, there's two schools of thought among the experts. One of them is queer and one of them is questioning. What does the word queer actually mean? It means weird, that's right. The word queer actually means weird in the English language. So what they've done is to say, you know what? We're weird and we're proud. So they're actually accepting what the Quran is saying, that this is weird. This is not normal. This is not natural. But they've turned it around and flipped it and said, you know what? Queer, we're proud of it. We're happy about it. Questioning means, I don't know, I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure what I am. Then they added more. Then they added an I. What does the I stand for? Insane? No, it's not insane. What is it? You know what it is? No. Illegal? No, it's not illegal. This is basically the group that's trying to normalize the abnormal behavior that we're trying to talk about that's not allowed in Islam. So what do you think the I, does anyone know what the I stands for? I'm just trying to get a gauge of how many of you are like in college, you're learning this in high school or middle school or whatever it is. Nobody knows what the I is? Yes. Okay, one of the madhabs says intersex, right? And an intersex basically means it's different from transgender. Transgender is when somebody actually thinks in their mind that they're a different gender, but there's nothing different in their body. Intersex, what used to be called khuntha in Arabic, those of you who study Islamic law, this means somebody actually has physical characteristics of the opposite gender, of both genders, right? This is like a physical abnormality or defect, or they have an extra chromosome which is causing them to actually have these physical differences. So this is one madhab. And you know what the other meaning of I is? Anybody? Inquisitive. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Alright, so we got LGBTQ, and then more letters just keep getting added, so they put a plus at the end. So what you're going to find is that this, what they call the alphabet now, they keep on adding more letters to it, but it all comes back down to only two things. And it's very important for Muslims to not sit there and just accept other people's terms. We should talk about and define our own terms. There's only two issues we're talking about today. There's two issues that really matter. All the letters you can put in there doesn't matter. Two issues. Issue number one is about physical attraction, right? What they call sexuality. The second one is about gender. So first one we talked about homosexuality and its variants. And the second one is what's called gender nonconformity, where basically a boy doesn't want to be a boy anymore. It says, I want to be a girl now. I want you to call me a female. I want to change my name from Ali to Fatima, or vice versa. And I'm going to start dressing up like a girl. I'm going to inject hormones into my body. I'm going to go and try and get a surgery to make myself look more like the opposite gender. And everyone has to accept me the way that I am. This is what we call gender nonconformity. Now, what does Islam say about that? Because this is not mentioned in the story of Prophet Lut directly. So what we do find instead is we find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about how He created male and female. Everywhere you see throughout the Quran, Allah talks about Allah created the male and He created the female. Then Allah says, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى, and He says, and the male is unlike the female is unlike the male. The two are not similar, right? He talks about so many ideas of this gender binary that's there. And then you find the rulings in Islam being differentiated between there's a man and there's a woman. If somebody passes away, this is how much inheritance they're going to get. And if they're a female, this is how much inheritance they're going to get. And there's so many rules built into the Sharia, built into Islamic law that talk about this. And based on all of that, we get this concept that, you know what? There's only two genders that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. And if there's an instance of intersex where somebody actually has a physical abnormality where they have other parts of a gender or other parts of the other gender, that doesn't mean that they're like switching over to a different gender. It means that there's a deformity. It doesn't mean that people can simply pick whatever gender they want. So where do we find this first of all? We find the first rule in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is in Sahih al-Bukhari, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas, where he said, لَعْنَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ الْمُتَشَبِّهِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ بِالنِّسَاءِ. He said that the Prophet, peace be upon him, cursed the men who try to imitate women. وَالْمُتَشَبِّهَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ بِالرِّجَالِ, and the women who try to imitate men. So what does it mean to imitate? Right? Imitating a man, if a man dresses up like a woman, he dresses up in a skirt, like today, there's some very clear-cut clothing that is for men and some very clear-cut clothing that is for women, right? So if a guy wears high heels and puts on lipstick and puts on nail polish, is that normal male clothing? No, it's not. So the person is trying to imitate a woman. And if a woman comes along and says, I'm going to wear a bow tie and I don't know, what else do men wear? Like manly dress shoes or whatever it is, right? She's trying to do something like that and say, this is, in our culture, this is not something that women wear. What did the Prophet, peace be upon him, say? He said, he cursed them. And he said, these people have earned the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that they're very far away from the mercy of Allah. Meaning Allah is very unhappy with people who are doing this. So this type of practice is prohibited. Now there's two types of people. So the Prophet prohibited imitating the opposite gender. And there's two reasons why people would do something like this. The first reason is because they think it's cool or they think it's funny. And the most popular example of somebody in the world today who does this, who dresses up like the opposite gender because they think it's funny and they think it's cool, is a man by the name of RuPaul. Who has heard of RuPaul? Very few people in this audience. That's actually a good thing. You know. What you'll find is that many people actually watch the RuPaul show. It's a very popular show, and he's one of the most popular people, and he's a comedian. So what he'll do is he'll go and imitate women. He's going to dress up like a woman. He's going to imitate them. He's going to mock them, make fun of them, do all sorts of things, and people laugh it off. And this is exactly how people's fitrah, their natural way that Allah created them, starts to change. Through comedy and laughing things off. So he's one of the most popular person, but if you ask him, are you actually a woman? He says, no. That's what he does. He dresses up. And he says that he's dressing up. So this is called a transvestite, or at least it used to be called that. There's a second type of person who they actually believe in their mind that they are the opposite gender. And this is a condition called gender identity disorder. And it's also been renamed in the DSM-5 to gender dysphoria. And it's classified as a mental disorder. All right? It's not treated like a mental disorder in today's society, but it's classified as a mental disorder. And I'll tell you why later on, why that is. But the most popular person in the world today who has gender dysphoria, does anyone know who it is? Your names? Bruce Jenner, that's right. Bruce Jenner, who changed himself and re-identified as Caitlyn Jenner, got a complete surgery done, and was actually put on, I think, Vogue or some magazine, basically showing how beautiful, and men were looking at him and saying, wow, she's really beautiful. Okay, so these two are not the same. One person who is a transvestite knows that they're a man, but they want to dress up like a woman. What does Islam say about that? Don't do it. Don't do it, right? If you know you're a man, but you're dressing up like a woman, don't do that. What does Islam say about the second person who actually believes that they are the opposite gender in their mind, but physically there's no difference whatsoever in their body? What does Islam say about that? It says the same thing. It says the rule doesn't change. The rule doesn't change because you think you're something. Say, well, therefore, because I don't think I'm a man, I'm going to go ahead and dress up like a woman now. And I'm going to go ahead and get a surgery done. And I'm going to cut certain parts of my body off that men usually have because I think I'm a woman. Or if a woman thinks that she's a man, I'm going to get a surgery done and I'm going to cut certain parts of my body off that women have because I don't think I'm a woman. So I'm going to remove them. And this is exactly what's happening today. And not only is it happening, I mentioned to you, I might tell you why. Why is it allowed? No surgeon will come. If you go to a surgeon and say, I don't think I'm a man anymore, I feel like I'm a woman, I would like you to go and operate on me and put chemicals in my body and put hormones in my body, and I want you to cut certain parts of my body off and everything like that. The surgeon cannot refuse. I'm going to take questions soon, inshallah. The surgeon cannot refuse that operation. And if they do, they will lose their license. So I know people who are in the medical field today, and if they try to even say, I would like a religious exemption because my religion of Islam does not allow me to perform this procedure, or my religion of Islam does not allow me to administer the hormones to someone who is a biological male or a biological female and they want to change it over, my religion doesn't allow that, they will lose their insurance. They will lose their job, basically. Not only that, but I told you that in today's society, you'll find that this is not treated as a mental illness. In fact, if you say it's a mental illness, people will be like, you're transphobic. You're not respecting this person. But then the irony is, it's still listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the latest version, version 5. Why would it be in the Manual of Mental Disorders, but nobody treats it like a mental disorder? Does anybody know the answer to this? It took me 3 years to figure out why. I could never figure it out until finally I read some expert articles on it, and I'm like, now it makes sense. Does anybody know? It's kind of what I was saying. Not only can you not refuse the surgery, but your insurance company will pay for the surgery. Do you know why they will pay for the surgery? Because it's a mental disorder. It's a mental disorder. So what we're going to do is, because it's a mental disorder it comes under the category of mental illness, and the insurance company will pay for it. But when you go to work, if you say, you know what, I don't want to call John, who used to be John, I don't want to refer to him as a she just because he decided to change his mind because he has a mental disorder. And they say, if you don't, you're going to be fired. You're not allowed to work in this school. You're not allowed to work in this university. You shouldn't be part of this company. If you're not going to wear a rainbow mask, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do that. So this is what's going on in today's society, unfortunately. All right? So this was, so far, like 25% of my talk. All right? But I want to open it up to questions. All right? So I'm going to summarize the few things that I want to say, and then I'm going to open it up to see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I can continue going, have a lot more content. So what does Islam say about more of these details here? Let me say a few things. Number one, there's a movement in Islam called the revisionist movement. And there are people who are called progressive Muslims. And what they're doing is, they're coming along and they're saying, you know what? The Muslims have misunderstood the Quran. The people of Prophet Lut, they were not being criticized and condemned by Prophet Lut because of their wanting to, men marrying men. But the real issue was that they were engaging in non-consensual relationships and there was rape taking place. And that's why the people of Prophet Lut were destroyed, and that's why Allah condemned them, and people have misunderstood and misread all the verses of the Quran in that context. And I want to warn you and say, be careful of this group. I get emails all the time. I just got an email a few days ago, basically a woman telling me, saying, you guys misunderstood the verses of the Quran. The verses of the Quran is all about non-consensual relationships among the people of Prophet Lut. There's nothing wrong with a man having a relationship with a man. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying. And then she gave some long explanation about how the word bal antum qawmun musrifun. She didn't even know Arabic, by the way. She said the word bal means like a negating of removing what had been mentioned previously. It was a very, very strange argument. There's an entire group of people who are writing books and papers to try to change the religion of Islam. And I want to warn you and say, do not fall into this group, into this category, because it just simply doesn't make any sense at all. When Prophet, I won't even get into the arguments, right? But let me say this. Alcohol is prohibited in Islam. Yes? Okay. Are there some Muslims who drink? There are. Are there some Muslims who try to make an argument and saying, when they drink, that alcohol is not prohibited in the Quran? Are there some Muslims like that? There are. Does it mean that their argument is strong and that actually there's some difference of opinion among scholars or something like that? No. So what happens is when people are following their desires and they're doing something wrong, they try to change things around in the Quran to make it mean something that it doesn't actually mean. There's a difference between a valid difference of opinion among scholars on some verse or whatever it may be. You can make wudu this way, or you can make wudu a little bit differently, but not on something that's fundamental. When we say قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say He is Allah. Ahad means one. Allah is one. Now the Christians, they believe that God is a trinity. They believe that Allah is three in one. And if some Christian comes along, and I've seen this before, they said, we believe in the Quran too, but we believe in the Trinity. We believe that there's a God the Father, that there's a God the Son, and there's the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. And all these three are one. And I say, how do you explain قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ? Say He is Allah the One. They said, we believe that God is one, but He is one in a Trinity. If you try to take the concept of Trinity, the concept that Jesus is the Son of God, as the Christians say, you try to fit that into the Quran, you can go and twist the meanings of the Quran around as much as you want, but is that what the Quran is really saying? No. This is exactly what a progressive Muslim movement is doing. They're trying to go, and there's entire books written on the subject, they're trying to take the story of Prophet Lut and change around the meaning and say, this is not what Prophet Lut was saying, and this is not, and guess what? Half of Christians have done this with their Bible, and half of Jews have done this with their books as well. So Muslims are trying to copy them and do the exact same thing, except alhamdulillah, guess what? Allah mentioned the story of Prophet Lut in 105 verses, in different places, telling the story in different ways, so there's no ambiguity at all about what Prophet Lut was saying. And you can go into a detailed analysis of it, and I'm not going to go into it, but I have some lectures online about that. So be careful of this, number one. Number two, there are Muslims and there are people who have what's called SSA. And SSA is what we call same-sex attraction, meaning they're attracted to somebody of the same gender. There's a difference between someone who's feeling an attraction and someone who is engaging in the behavior. They're not the same thing. Now there are Muslims and there are other people who say, we don't know why we're having these strange feelings, but we know what the Quran says. We are not progressives. We're not trying to change what the Quran says. We know that it's haram, but we don't know what to do. So I will get a guy who comes into my office and says, Shaykh, my parents are pressuring me to get married, and I'm 30 years old now, and I've been delaying and I've been trying to put it off, and they keep pressuring me, and I want to tell you the real reason why I'm not getting married is because I feel no attraction to women at all. I only feel attraction to men. And I know it's haram, and I know I'm not supposed to do it, and I'm not going to do anything haram. But I don't know what to do, and I don't know who to go to help for. I don't know who can help me. And the problem is that most people can't help them because of few reasons. If that person, if that boy, if that guy, or let's say the girl has the same issue, if she goes to her parents, or she goes to her friends, usually what will the Muslim community do? You're sick. Get the heck out of here. You're gross. I don't want to be around you. I don't want to be near you. And now we can't help this person. If you send the same person to a psychologist, the psychologist is trained in what's called affirmative therapy. And they will bring them in and say, if this is the way you feel, the only way you're going to get better is by asserting your authentic self. And this is who you truly are. And you say, okay, let's send them to the Muslim therapist. Problem is, the Muslim therapist has been trained in affirmative therapy. And this is not to put down Muslim therapists or whatever, but whatever field you go into, when you're sitting there for 3 years and 3,000 hours of supervision, there's some brainwashing that gets done, no matter how strong your Islamic values are. And there are many Muslim therapists that I know for a fact I would never send this brother to, because they will secretly go and say affirmative therapy. Or there's absolutely nothing we can do, just fast for the rest of your life. Thanks a lot. Great, that's great advice. That's not good advice, by the way. That's what you should, you should fast, but that's not great advice. And then you say, okay, send them to the Islamic therapist, to someone who has good Islamic values, someone who really knows the Quran and their Sunnah, and they're not been indoctrinated by all this. Send them to the Muslim therapist who's over 50, who grew up in a different generation. They're not influenced by any of this stuff. And you know what the problem is? You send them to that Muslim therapist, and they say, look, my rate is $250 per hour. And they say, don't worry, I have insurance. They say, I can't take insurance, and I cannot actually officially do any therapy with you. If I do any therapy that's not affirmative therapy saying that your feelings are authentic, I will lose my counseling license. I just took 5 years of my life in education. I lost my license, got thrown down the drain. So they're not even allowed to help legally. It's banned. It's banned in California, and it's banned in most states in the country. So here's the problem. What do we do? What are we supposed to do? And I have every single week, I have people from around the world messaging me and telling me, you know what, Shaykh, I got these feelings. I don't know what to do. Who can help me? What should I do? Where should I go? And all that stuff. And there's very few resources that I can send them, that way. But there are resources. So I'm going to give you those 2 resources, and then I'll open up to questions, inshallah. The 2 best resources for this. If somebody, see, there's 2 types of people. There's a type of person who's going to come home to their parents, and sadly this happens a lot. They're going to come home, a girl is going to come home from college and saying, you know what, Mom, Dad, I'm gay, and I already have a girlfriend, and that's just the way it is. And I found these progressive Muslims who are willing to tell me that I'm doing everything fine and the story of Prophet Lut was wrong and you got it wrong. And sadly, I have to deal with this every single week. I have a case every single week I have to deal with. Then that's one issue. The second issue is the person who comes and says, Shaykh, I have these feelings and something's not right and I don't know what to do. I don't want to do anything haram. I'm not trying to change Islam, but what do I do? Why is this happening to me? What can I do about it? So I guide them. I ask them a bunch of questions first of all. Has there been any abuse in your past? Have you been through depression? Have you been through anxiety? Have you been through, is there any autism or whatever? There's usually what's called comorbidities that trigger these type of abnormal feelings and all that. But if you talk about it, you lose your license. Thank goodness I'm not a therapist. And I don't need to, no one's going to take my license away, right? And so I can talk about this freely. I mean, not freely. I mean, I'll still get cancelled somewhere, but I don't really care. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speaking the truth matters the most, right? So what do you do for these people? What you do is you send them to two resources. Because you may have a family member, you may have a friend. Let me just ask you real quick. How many of you know a Muslim who's going through this? Just raise your hand. Okay, so there's quite a few. Usually it's more, but there's quite a few. So here are the two resources. One of them is a Discord server, which used to be a website. It's called straightstruggle.com. It's a worldwide community of 800 Muslims right now, of people who have these feelings, but they're not trying to change the religion of Islam at all. And they say, we're trying to support each other, understand why this is happening to us. Some of them have had trauma in their past. Some of them have been through depression. Some of them have been abused. Some of them have been whatever it may be. People are learning to cope with it through sharing information and all that stuff. That's a great resource. The second resource is a podcast called A Way Beyond the Rainbow by a brother named Wahid Jensen. And Wahid Jensen is, a very courageous brother. He himself has same-sex attraction, but he does not act upon it. And he's been struggling with it for a very long time. Some people are married and they have this. Some people are not married and they have this. But he is someone who has recorded 85 episodes. I've done 4 episodes with him. And basically what he's doing is presenting a perspective of, hey, there are solutions to this. We need to understand why this is happening to people. We need to be able to give them good advice on what to do. So what I tell people, is people ask me all the time, so I'm just going to tell you before the Q&A, what do you do if somebody comes to you and says, this is what I'm dealing with? You send them to the website, straightstruggle.com, and you tell them to listen to the podcast as much as they can, 1 hour a day, get through all 85 episodes if they can, and it will be very beneficial for them if they're a little bit open-minded. And what should a parent or a family member or an uncle or whoever else it may be, if someone that you know is close to you is going through this, either they're gone and they're progressive, or they're struggling with it and they're trying to figure it out, you listen to the episodes and you will get a different perspective on what that world is like. Okay? And lastly, when it comes to politics, we need to be very careful. I think Muslims have made a really big mistake in politics of completely allying themselves with the Liberal Party 100%, with the Democratic Party on everything. And remember that Islam is neither Republican nor Democrat. Islam is neither right nor is it left. Islam is the straight path, right? Pun intended as well. So what you have to keep in mind is that when it comes to a politician that's going to come to you and say, hey, vote for me because I'm going to help the poor people of society. But I'm also going to mandate LGBT education for all kindergarten students, starting at kindergarten, going all the way up into high school. Whenever we're deciding, hey, as Muslims, which political candidate should we support? We have a very difficult choice. We have the one person who's saying, we want free healthcare for everybody, and we're going to help the poor and build more homeless shelters. But we're also going to mandate LGBT mandatory education in every single school and every single company, and anyone who goes against it, we're going to put them under homophobia, transphobia. And then we got the other candidate who's a little bit of a white supremacist racist and who's a little bit of an anti-Muslim bigot. But they're saying, no, we want to remove this LGBT stuff from our schools And we want to assert the idea that relationships are between men and women and you can do whatever you want privately, but we don't want stuff like this. So that's where Muslims are challenged. And we say, which one is actually better for us and which one is more harmful for us in the general equation of things? And that's why people need to be very clever and they need to be wise about the type of political decisions that they're making. So anyways, I've been talking a lot. I want to open up for questions, inshallah. So any questions? I had one question here. Bismillah. Oh, okay. You know this person? Oh, okay. So it's one of your friends or something like that? Oh, it's a YouTuber who wanted to change their identity. Yeah, okay. Okay. That's a good one. Yeah, doing makeup and all that, yeah. Did you have a question or you wanted to just tell me that? Thank you. Can I give you some advice? My advice is be very careful about the type of YouTubers that you watch. Because when you watch videos, what happens is whoever is promoting a product or saying, look at this nail polish or look at this or look at that, you start to develop an admiration for that person. And if the person is doing something that they're not a very good role model in life, just be cautious. Maybe try to find a different YouTuber to watch their videos. Okay, inshallah. Other questions? Yes.
So, there's someone in my class. He's a boy, but he refers as a they.
Yeah.
And he always seems like I do associate student body, ASB. And he's also in it. Every activity I know, he's always like.
He's always there.
Yeah.
And he identifies as they, them, basically. So what's happening is there's a claim that there's 72 genders now, and you can identify your own gender, and you can identify your own pronoun, and you're encouraged to invent your own genders and all of that stuff. Yeah. So that's challenging for you. And remember, Islam teaches that there's just two genders. You can't re-identify yourself. So just try your best to get along with people at school, while at the same time not letting it confuse you, because we know that what Allah has taught us about how He created people, that is the 100% clear-cut truth, inshallah. Yes. Okay, it's a good question actually. I never had that. So the question is, what if a boy identifies as a girl and a girl identifies as a boy and then they marry each other? Are they doing something wrong with the marriage? So remember we said that there's two subjects we're talking about. One of them is about physical attraction and physical relationships, and one is about gender. In terms of the physical relationship, there's nothing wrong that they're doing. In terms of their re-identification with gender, they shouldn't be doing that. But it's unconnected to their marriage. A very interesting question. Any questions from the brothers? Sisters have all the interesting questions. Yes, over there.
So are you allowed to have friendship?
Great question. Great question. This is the most common question to get. So are you allowed to be friends with somebody who is the LGB or T or any other of the letters on the spectrum? Right? So the answer is, you should, as a Muslim, you should always be careful of what type of friends you take. So, can you be friends with somebody who drinks alcohol? Technically, yes, right? But you want to be careful. Can you be friends with somebody who smokes marijuana? Technically, yes. Can you be friends with a drug dealer? Technically, yes. But would you be a little bit more careful with being friends with the drug dealer? Because something's a little bit, like, I don't know what circles they're going to hang around with. There's going to be some level of influence. I may not want to be around that circle because there's some issues with that. It all comes back down to what level of harm or influence are you going to have when you're picking your friends. So when you pick your friends, nobody's 100% perfect. But you need to know yourself and you need to know the other person. If you have a friendship with someone who's just very quiet and they do their own thing, but they're doing some stuff like this, that's different than if you have friendship with someone who's literally militant every day saying, why aren't you an ally? You need to be an LGBT ally. And I get people telling me all the time, say, if you're my friend, you would be an ally for the LGBT club. You would join the club, you would be an ally, but if you're not, then you're not my real friend. What are they doing? They're basically doing missionary work on you. They're propagating their beliefs to you, and it's going to wear you down. You probably don't want a friend like that. So choose your friends wisely. So technically you could be friends with almost anybody, but do you want to be friends with almost anyone? Pick the people who have a good influence on you, and more likely, pick the people who you can have a good influence on. Okay? Did you ask a question already? No? Okay, go ahead. You're going to have to speak up though. And they just keep switching back and forth, dressing up like different people. Right, so the thing is, again, when you have friends, right, there's a difference between a friend and an acquaintance. An acquaintance is somebody you see at school and you're like, oh, okay, we have to work on a group project together or whatever it is. You can work with anybody. But your friends are the people who after school you say, I really want to go to that person's home. Or I want that person to come over for, the Eid party that we're having or whatever it is. When it comes to your friends, make sure your friends are people who are doing good Islamic behavior, because that's going to affect you if you hang around with them too much. Okay? Yes.
So, you know how you said, like, if you're going to get surgery, you're put, like, chemicals inside? But what if you know that you're, like, a man or a woman, and you want to do that?
Okay. Yes, so let me answer that question. So her question was, if you want to put chemicals and stuff in your body and hormones and things like that, what if you know that you are a different gender, right? Then is it okay? Is that what you mean? Will they still pay for the surgery? They'll still pay for the surgery. Here's the problem. Let me explain to you the difference. What's happening today in America is somebody, let's say me, in my mind, if I decide, inshallah I won't. I don't, alhamdulillah. But if something goes wrong with me and all of a sudden I wake up the next morning and I say, you know what? I am a woman. I've been mistaken. I'm not a man, I'm a woman, right? I'm not Shaykh Mustafa anymore. I'm Shaykha Aisha, right? And I'm going to start identifying as that. I need to go to someone. I want to start getting all this stuff, pumped into me and all of that stuff. And I'm 100% convinced what should happen. What would normally happen in society? People around me will say, listen, Mustafa, you're deluded. Something is not right with your mind. We're not going to allow you to do this to yourself. This is going to destroy your body. You're going to pump in hormones. You're going to chop off certain parts of your body. You're going to go and get physical surgery. This is horrible for your body. You don't know what you're saying. You don't understand what's going on. We want to help you. We're not going to allow you to do this. That's what's supposed to happen. What's happening in society today is the opposite. They're saying, that's the way you feel. Whatever you feel, that's the way you are. We will accept you and we'll start calling you Aisha from now on. Now imagine, this same thing is happening with people who are identifying as animals. There are people in school today, just a few weeks ago, there was a girl in school, she says, I identify as a cat. So when her teacher calls out roll, whatever her name was, Jenny, she'll say meow. And the teacher has to accept the meow because she says, I'm actually a cat, I'm not a human being. She asked the school to have a litter box put inside the bathroom so that she can go to the bathroom on the litter box because she believes she's a cat. Now, should we go and tell her, you know what, because you really think you're a cat, let's start changing your body around and putting chemicals in so we can start making you more like a cat. Let's put some teeth in there so you can start eating cat food and stuff like that. We would not do that, right? Because we'd say something's not right with you. The same thing Islam says when it comes to gender is that if you're physically, biologically one gender, whatever you're thinking in your mind, something is not right. You need some other help. Usually you've been through depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorder, or some other what's called comorbidity, and you need to work on resolving those issues, and automatically you will start to realize what your normal gender is. And this is what happens to many people. There are people who are called detransitioners. They went through the whole surgery, and then a few years later they realized this was a big mistake. Why did I do that? I was deluded. I was just not in my right state of mind. I want to go back now. So what do they have to do to go back? They have to go again for surgery. And when they undo the surgery with another surgery, they're never the same again. I've spoken to and met many detransitioners, and they're telling other people, don't allow yourself to ruin your life. You're going to ruin your whole body because you cut off and you injected and you did all sorts of things. It's like mutilating your body. So if someone thinks that, they're mistaken in their thought process and they need help. Yes.
How did it happen?
How did what happen?
The LGBT.
How did it start? So there are people who have these thoughts and there are people who have these feelings. And rather than stopping themselves, they said, you know what? We're going to do whatever we feel like. And they said, and everyone should accept us. So they developed a movement of people and said, we're going to pressure people to make sure that this becomes normal in society. So they put pressure on every single movie company and said, you need to have one of the characters in there to be LGBT. And then they went to the comic books and said, you better have characters in there that need to be LGBT. So the more it is showed in the media, people are watching it and they're like, it seems like it's normal, but it's actually not normal. But if you keep adding stories like that, you start thinking it's more and more normal. Right? Okay, yes. I think we're going to have to break soon though, right? We're going to have to probably break.
I actually have a comment and a question.
Okay, so let me just ask you, what should we do with the... There's some great questions, but I don't know how. It was the other sister had a question too. What should we do? Should we break, or we have another program afterwards, right? So we can't do... Okay, inshallah.
But we have 7 minutes.
Should we continue then?
We can continue, like maybe one more question.
One more. Okay, so I'll take the last question, and then what I can do is I'll give everyone my email address, and I'd love to hear your questions. So you can email me, inshallah, and we'll continue the conversation offline, inshallah. So, yeah, that's a great question. It's a common question that I get. So if someone is using a pronoun, right, that's not their actual pronoun, what should you do? This is my advice. My advice is you pick your battles. And pick your battles mean it all depends. If this is a friend of yours or someone you've known for a very long time, you should say, listen, I know this is what you think, but in my religion, we do not accept that somebody can change their gender. So I'm not going to refer to you as your pronoun. You want to change your name, I'll refer to you as your new name. But I cannot refer to you as your pronoun because now you're asking me to change my entire understanding of reality. Right? Now if it's someone you're just going to meet for a few seconds, and you're like, oh, hi, how are you doing? This is my name. Oh, nice to meet you. And you're like, by the way, I want to tell you about my religion. I am not able to talk to you about your pronoun and this and that. You don't have time for that, and you don't have time to have a debate with them, and you don't have time to go into details. So if you use the pronoun because you simply don't have time to address it and challenge it and all of that stuff, it's okay if you do that. But you don't want to be doing that all the time, because if you do that all the time, happens in families. If Uncle Ali re-identifies as Auntie Fatima, right? When Auntie Fatima, when Uncle Ali leaves, right? You're going to say he left, because if you say she left, guess what? Now your children and your siblings, they're all going to start hearing that, and it's going to become normal and say, you've accepted that he's changed his gender. And now kids will grow up to be completely confused because you've accepted a false reality and you've taught it and you've normalized it in your own social circle. So my advice is, in your own social circle, in your own environment, you use what is correct. If you're outside of that and you're just interacting with people once in a while to avoid conflict, you can go ahead and use the pronoun temporarily, inshallah. Hopefully this has been beneficial. My email is mustafayou@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear from you, inshallah. I'm very happy. There's so many questions and so much interaction, especially from the youth. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you and bless this institution, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallahukhairan, Shaykh Mustafa, Umar. So inshallah, and after that we will have
We have a youth program after Salat al-Isha. I highly advise if they're really young not to stay for this lecture. This is going to be a specific questions probably to this topic. As parents, you probably anybody under 16, I would definitely take them home. That's my advice, and I would. Jazakallahukhairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Are you sure? I was told that the youth program is just a lecture about desires.
Desires you.
Is that okay?
Assalamu alaikum. We can keep the chairs. Jazakumullah khair. Keep the chairs, inshallah. So.
It's general about desires, not so much.
It's not a desire.
I was not told in details. I don't know. It's up to you.
Yeah,
Whatever
leave
the
it
youth
to you.
coordinator says.
Yeah,
You know.
she's the one. She said 18 plus.
Oh, she said that?
Yeah.
Okay, khalas. No problem. That's fine.
Mustafa.
Just wanted to get